Good afternoon, everybody. And as you can see, this is a slightly different location. I'm not driving currently, but I thought I'd just tell you a little story. I think the point at which I felt that the Turkish policeman was probably going to shoot me was when he knocked me to the ground and knelt down next to me with his gun pulled and pointed in my face. He was absolutely raging. And I noticed that the veins on his neck were very prominent. His face was, well, it was purple. And I thought that I had pushed this way too far, but it was too late. He was screaming at me. I presume he was explaining how he was going to kill me. I felt just fleetingly immensely sad. Not for the obvious reason. The obvious reason being that he was about to shoot me. No, it wasn't that. It was because the whole thing had been avoidable. And because my idiocy and arrogance had led to this. Now, the fact that I'm telling you this evidences that obviously he didn't shoot me. For that, I have to thank his colleague, who, realizing just how far the situation had gone, came over and started shouting, not in anger, but imploringly, to his colleague. And I would suppose that the basis of that was, this is not worth it, for heaven's sake. This is going to cause us no end of trouble. Don't do this. Think about what you're doing. Well, I wish I'd thought about what I was doing in the first place, and then it wouldn't have happened. Once his colleague intervened, trying to rescue the situation, I started thinking that maybe there was a chance that I wasn't going to die there at the side of the road. Well, as it transpires, obviously I didn't. And with much talking between the two policemen, the gun was holstered. He stood up, shouted some things at me, which they sounded like threats. I have no idea. I was just trying to keep my mouth shut. And they left. I was shaken by the incident. It really hadn't played out the way I'd expected. I don't know why I thought that, because I was very arrogant in my dealings with him, which drove him to anger. I was also, I suppose, I was not in any way accepting that he had any authority. You have to remember that this was his country, not mine. He was the policeman. Now, I may have liked some of the Turkish rules and regulations, nor some of their customs, but it didn't give me the authority to use arrogance to argue, and certainly not to deny his authority. Anyway, on my journey onward, I convinced myself that although it hadn't played out well, I was alive and I hadn't been fined for speeding, which is how the whole thing arose. I had argued, remembering this was the early to mid-1980s, I had argued that there was no possibility that the Turkish police could be using radar guns. You can see the implied insult to the country there. When he'd shown me the radar gun, I'd laughed at it, I'd mocked it, as if it was a toy, and pointing to the salt lakes around us, the salt plains rather around us, explained that how could they, provincial policemen, possibly have a radar gun in such a remote place. It was likely to have made him angry, as it did. Nonetheless, on my way to the border, it was a Greek border I was going to. I arrived there, and the incident was largely forgotten by me at this point. I hadn't been fined, the incident had resolved itself, and that was the end of the matter. But it wasn't the end of the matter. I was made to pay at the border because they had been informed of what had been going on, what had happened. My registration had been taken, and they were watching for me arriving at the border, as they knew I would have to. And at that border, I was made to pay for my arrogance. It was very clear that I would not be leaving that border if I didn't pay the fines. And they weren't just fines for speeding, there were fines for, effectively, there were fines for the insult, both to the police officers and to the Turkish nation. I feel everything I'd done had been an implied insult not only to the policeman's authority, but to everyone who had authority within Turkey. So it cost me a lot of money. And had I simply gone along with it, had I simply accepted that they said I was speeding, the fine would have been a few pounds. That's all, nothing else. But, you know, I was a young man, and I, as many others I think did, I masked my anxiety whilst out in Turkey and beyond. I masked my anxiety with a display of arrogance. It was a way of, I suppose, trying to put over that you are not to be messed with. You are not weak. It really wasn't a good way of dealing with the situation. So what did I learn? What did I learn from that? Did I actually learn that arrogance, misplaced, used as a tool to disguise your anxiety, which I am convinced the Turks were not fooled by one single bit. Did I learn that? Did I learn to find more adult ways of dealing with my anxiety and situations that could unfold in, well, so many different ways out there? No, that wasn't the lesson I learned. I certainly learned that arguing to the point at which you induce anger was not the way. If I tell you about another incident a few months later, this will tell you what I learned. I was driving more or less the same route. I had another English lorry with me, a guy called Chris Stevenson, I think he was called. Chris, you were a good bit older than I was at the time. If you are still alive and I've just messed your name up, you have my apologies, Chris. So there we were driving along, the same area, simply salt plains to one side, Rocky Mountains to the other. And we were stopped by the police. And it was Chris that they targeted on this occasion. and they wanted his paperwork. They said he was speeding, and Chris started arguing, as we did. We were lorry drivers, and that's what we thought we should do. That was the traditional approach, just start arguing, saying you're talking nonsense and so forth. And it didn't go well for him either, and a gun was drawn, and I saw the same situation unfolding that I had experienced not many months before. Watching this and seeing Chris continue to argue and the situation going downhill very rapidly, what I did was I ran over to my lorry, and I always carried a camera with me. There was some beautiful scenery on my journeys. I grabbed my camera and jumped out of the truck again and started shouting to the police, calling them friend, Alkadash, and pointing to my camera and smiling and trying to explain as best I could that I wanted to take a picture of them with my friend, the Scottish lorry driver. He was from Scotland. No, not strictly speaking. He was from the borders. But I wanted to take a picture of the policeman with his gun, because in England we didn't have policemen with guns, and it was very impressive. And would it be okay if I took a picture? I was being very, shall we say, subordinate and friendly and smiling. They got the idea of what I wanted, and it changed immediately the entire situation. And the policeman left off Chris and lowered his gun and was basically saying to me, yes, that's good, you want a picture? And I was explaining I did want a picture. It ended up with the most bizarre, comedic scene where we were there, mountains on one side, salt plains on the other side, 2 British lorries, and 2 smiling policemen with their pretending to arrest Chris, and me taking pictures, pretending to arrest Chris while pointing guns at him whilst I took pictures. Chris, I'd indicated to him during this that, for God's sake, Chris, play along with this situation, because otherwise it's going to be unpleasant. Just play along. And he did. In credit to Chris, he played along. He was smiling and looking, then sometimes looking crestfallen and worried, whilst I took pictures. And then I took pictures of the policemen individually. It was great. We shared cigarettes, we laughed, we joked about trucks, about policemen, about guns, about idiot drivers. With the language barrier, it was still quite possible to have such conversations. And we went on our ways happy, and Chris had no problems. He didn't have a fine, he didn't get any paperwork taken from him, all was good. What I learned was that humour goes beyond all languages. If you can take a bad situation and bring humour to it, then you start making people smile, and if you start making people smile, you diffuse situations. The policeman thought that I was being deferential to them. I was taking an interest in what was going on, and I wasn't feeling threatened, which certainly helped. And I wanted to take pictures of them, to take back to England, to show. And this made them feel good. And it made them feel happy that I was smiling. And everybody really ultimately wanted that situation diffused, but everybody had to save face somehow. The policemen couldn't just back down. They were the authority. I gave an out, a way for everyone to diffuse, to de-escalate that situation. I did it through humour. And levity, is that the right word? So that's what I learned. And I did use that many, many times in the future. I brought humour and smiles and jollity to situations that were becoming tense and threatening. Of course, that wouldn't always work, but it certainly did work as an alternative to confrontation. There is always an alternative to confrontation. There may well be a place for confrontation. But for the average British or European lorry driver out in Turkey or the Middle East, confrontation was not the best way. Now, that was just a very short story I wanted to tell you. I've been working on this tractor. As you can see, I was just emptying this filter, this diesel filter bowl, which had a lot of rubbish from the diesel tank. It's a very old tractor, built I think in the early 1970s, but it works, it does a job. And so I see no need to have a modern, technologically laden tractor. And this, incidentally, this tractor was built, I don't know if it shows on the video up here, but it was built in Czechoslovakia, not the Czech Republic, but Czechoslovakia, in the days of, well, the Soviet Union and the Iron Curtain. And they certainly built things to last. They certainly valued things. They knew that when they made something, it had to last a long time, or should last a long time. That way you didn't waste resources. So here it is in the far, far north of Scotland, all the way from Czechoslovakia. That's not where I bought it, obviously. And it still works and it still does a job. You have to be a bit respectful of it because of its age and the fact that it isn't a particularly heavy tractor, but it does a fine job. It's very simple, very easy to maintain. And that's it. I will make some other videos about that in the future. Anyway, thank you very much. I hope you don't mind that I wasn't driving. I hope you enjoyed the little story. The format of my videos might change in the near future. I do have a lot of work to do here in the shed with tractor and machinery and vehicles. And I thought, well, maybe I will start making videos from in here whilst I'm doing jobs. If you think that's okay, do let me know in the comments. If you particularly just like the driving, some have mentioned that it's cathartic, then do say so. I don't mind. I will continue with driving videos. I do a lot of travelling, but I also do a lot of this. And so if this kind of thing is okay by you, then please say so. And I'll be happy to continue making my little story videos whilst working on the machinery in my shed. Thank you very much. Please leave a comment, either like or dislike the video. If you dislike it, I would be really happy if you actually put in the comments why you disliked it. It helps me, it lets me know what you'd like to hear. I have lots of stories I'd like to tell and can be helpful. So, thank you very much. Leave a comment, leave a like, and I will speak to you all a little bit later. Thank you very much indeed. Bye-bye for now.